Hey everyone, Rob Ryder. Thursday, October 11th, 2012. And, I get asked all the time because I'll put things out on mortgages or whatever, What about property taxes? What about property taxes? What about property taxes? Okay, let's do one on property taxes. If you haven't realized yet, anymore, I'm really advocating a very, very, very narrow list of things to do. Real simple. First of all, we're going to go to our brother first. So we're going to write these people a letter. And we're going to ask certain questions on the letter and then give them 15 days to respond. And I picked 15 because it's used for executory devices that need to be executed. Again, an executory device is like a deed that the grantor has done all he can, but the grantee has not yet acknowledged it. And for a deed to be lawfully executed, both parties must agree. So they both have to seal it. So here's a typical delinquent property tax statement. Looks like it's from Harris County, Texas. Some dude named Don Summers is acting as their CPA, the tax assessor collector. Okay, so we know that Harris County, Texas is a corporation. He must be their certified public accountant. And it's got an account number, and looks like they're saying, oh, some dude owes some money. Oh my God, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Well, let's first of all take a breath. Okay, it came in the mail. Go get the damn mail. I had somebody email me. They said they had some tax stuff waiting for them at the post office, and they hadn't gone to pick it up, right? People are afraid to get your stuff. Go get the damn paper, right? Because it's your evidence for step 2 if we need to use this 2-step process. I'm hoping we can do it with one. So, this was my idea of how I would respond to the Harris County, Texas delinquent property tax statement. Okay, so Don Summers, a CPA, RTA, whatever the hell that means, tax assessor collector. Yeah, I just copied and pasted this right off of the other page, right? Off of his bill. Mr. Summers, the included copy of Harris County, Texas delinquent property tax statement for account number appears to be an attempt to enforce the collection of a false obligation. Harris County is a corporation, and my records do not show that we have mutually agreed to any contracts. By what authority is this claim made? I'm either mistaken now, and we do have a bilateral contract that you can provide foolproof evidence of its existence, or I have been mistaken in the past by making payments without any consideration on the part of Harris County Corporation and its officers, in which case I ask you to return my securities or the value of their conversion and gain. To not do so would be an unjust gain for your corporation and a sin against its officers. Therefore, I ask that you respond providing said foolproof evidence of our mutual consent to a contract or return my property within the next 15 days. Otherwise, I will have to ask the bishop of the diocese to inquire into the business practice of your corporation and ask his help in securing my property. Mail your response to the same address that this statement was originally mailed to. On this, the 11th day of October, the year of our Lord 2012, the undersigned notices the respondent of his obligation to prove its claim. And I'm going to sign it. And of course, anything that has the word seal behind it, you just chose your seal. In common law, things must be sealed. They don't need to be signed. Common law is the unwritten law of reason. English law is common law and custom. That's the laws of England. And English common law is the unwritten law of reason and statutes. But common law itself is just the unwritten law of reason. What does that mean? It's divine law. Right? A Gentile doesn't need the law written down. He knows it in his heart. That would be Romans 2:14. I don't need the law written down. I know what the law is. Treat my brother like I treat myself. But apparently there's a bunch of people who think they're good Christians who, really what they do is they pray on you all week long, and then they go into church on Sunday and they pray for their soul, for their salvation. because they don't believe that, they think that faith alone is going to get them into heaven. That it doesn't take any good works. You can do whatever the hell you want when you're down here. You can transgress God's laws daily, and that's what they do. Somebody brought a false obligation. That's a sin. They broke a commandment. I'm going to take it to the bishop. So, that's as simple as I can make it, right? The idea is you want to send this letter, all right? So you're going to do this and go to a notary, have her witness your signature, which is fine. All we want is the notary seal on it, because notary office is an ecclesiastic office, and when they put their seal on it, we just gave the ecclesiastic court jurisdiction. If these people don't answer in 15 days, we are going to write a petition to the bishop. And we're going to say that for a little bit. First of all, do this. You need to do step 1 first. Quit worrying about fucking 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? You want to play along, write the letter, send it in. Let's see what they say. That's how we learn, by asking damn questions. Make them answer something. And if they don't answer, well, we'll take it to the bishop. See what he has to say. Now here's another one. This is a notice of federal tax lien. Some form I never heard of, right? 668. And basically it says, as provided in these sections of the Internal Revenue Code, we are giving notice that taxes, including interest and penalties, have been assessed against the following named taxpayer. We have made a demand for payment of this liability, but it remains unpaid. Therefore, there is a lien in the favor of the United States on all property and rights to the property belonging to the taxpayer for the amount of these taxes and additional penalties, interest, and costs that may accrue. See, they never say how much the tax is. They say there's a unpaid balance on the assessment, but they don't say what the tax is. That's your assessed value, but what's the tax? They never told you. So if you go and do a public record search on your name, you can find all sorts of shit that's been recorded, right? First of all, you're going to go search on your name in the public record, and you may need to go to the tax assessor's office. You may need to go to the register of deeds. Where else do you need to go? And you're going to do a search on your name for anything that's in there against your name. If you think these are things you need to do, if you want to know about these things, well, that's how you find out. I do it as a Freedom of Information Act, right? Because if they say that, well, maybe not, because really you're supposed to ask for a specific item, but maybe you could. You want all the records against whatever your name is, whatever your address is. And they have to, when they give it to you, then they have to certify that that's everything that's against your name. That's the reason to do it. They do certify Freedom of Information Acts, right? And that's a witness under seal, and that's powerful shit. Well, how would we do this one? All right, so here's another example. So on this one here, where are we? See, look at, you got 92,000 and change. And it says place of filing, County Recorder, Maricopa County, Phoenix, Arizona, total 92,906.27. Well, filing and deposit is the file and deposit has the same meaning. To file something means to deposit it. So place of deposit is here, and they've deposited almost $93,000 with the County Recorder, Maricopa County, Phoenix, Arizona. That's how I read it. And then this notice is prepared in Denver, Colorado on this, the 17th day of March, right? By R.A. Mitchell for somebody else, title revenue officer. Right? Well, there's no address for this dude, right? Where? How am I supposed to get a hold of R.A. Mitchell for Russell Nelson if I don't have an address? Certificate of officer authorized by law to take acknowledgement is not essential to the validity of a notice of federal tax lien for whatever rule. Yeah, it's because the fucker has no value anyways. Sorry, Lord. Okay, so that's what I say to them. So public record, whatever the number is, recorded in your office, claims to be, so anyways, I'm writing this to the county recorder, right? That's where the deposit was made. Claims to be a notice of a federal tax lien in the favor of the United States against all property and rights to property belonging to the taxpayer. This isn't me, but if it was, Robert Allen Orliski. Further, it appears that your office is the place of deposit, filing, in the amount of 92 and change. This notice was prepared by a revenue agent unknown to me, without any address to contact said agent directly, nor was it acknowledged as to its good faith. As a notice is not a lien, and this document has no lawful merit due to it, or due it. Maybe I should put it in two. I put it in two. Due to it. Now do it. I demand that a certified copy of the lawfully recorded lien be provided me, or barring this, the value of the deposit be mailed to the address of the taxpayer found on the public record, whatever. A statutory lien is an unrecorded lien that has not been delivered or lawfully noticed, and the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in King v. Mullins, being 171 U.S. 404, that such liens are unconstitutional. It is my belief that this is a fictitious notice in an attempt to seize myself from the use of my personal property for the unjust gain of another and sin against the commandments of the Heavenly Father. If I did not have your lawful response within 15 days, I'll be forced to petition the bishop of this diocese to inquire into the business practice of your office for allowing the notice of an unrecorded lien to be recorded, and his assistance in determining who is involved in this sin. On this 11th day of October, you got the rest, right? So, we're going to give them 15 days to do the right thing. Give us evidence that we owe these things, or that they have right to have it, or this lien exists, or whatever the thing is. They don't. We're going to take it to the bishop. That simple. So there's all sorts of things that you could use this on. You could do it with a court case. You could do it with a foreclosure. Write the attorney and tell him he's got 15 days to provide evidence that he has by what authority he's bringing these charges. As soon as you get it in the mail, send it back to him. Say, okay, you said you say I owe you this. Show me your evidence. If you don't, I'm going to take it to the bishop. In whatever words you want to use. So, bishop, bishop, bishop. What's all this religious crap anyways, man? I know that bothers people. Sorry about that. Get over it. Why I hate religion, but love Jesus. Excellent. I couldn't explain it any better myself. If you've not ever heard this guy's poem, you should go listen to it sometime. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, you really need to start with the video I did a month ago. Today, Oaths, Truth, or Consequences, when I first started to get into canon law after really, sitting back saying, well, what does it say? Because I had never read it before. A month later, I've read a lot. I've listened to a lot, and I have a lot different perception than I had a month ago. And all I can say is thank you, Jesus, thank you, Lord. So I'm going to read some excerpts out of this book. It's called The Elements of Ecclesiastic Law, and it was adapted especially for the discipline of the church in the United States. And you could find this on archive.org. Right, just put in Elements of Ecclesiastic Law in the search, and there it'll be. But there's numerous books in there about ecclesiastic law. Maybe you'll find one you like better, right? Let God lead you to whatever one is good for you. But here's why you might want to read something like this and really sit back, say, okay, why do I have the feelings I do about church? Right? It's because of things I've been told. Well, I've been told a lot of things in my life, and they're all turning out to be lies, right? So how come that couldn't be a lie? So what did the church have to say? Because they never come out and say it. You got to remember, a theologian sitting there in the church is not a canonist. There's a big difference. So, but I'm not saying a lot of priests don't know this stuff. It's just they're there in a different office than a canonist. A canonist is the one that watches church law. The theologian, he's the one that preaches it. Okay. And they're waiting for us to come and say, hey, got something for you to work on. All right, so relation of church and state. From what has been said, we infer, in all things which are purely temporal and lie outside the end of the church, it, the church, never claims nor has jurisdiction. In all things which promote or hinder the internal happiness of men, the church has power to judge and enforce. In all things which promote or hinder eternal happiness, they have right to judge and enforce. We now apply these principles to the relations of the spiritual and civil powers, the church and state, by laying down these propositions. In things temporal, and in respect to the temporal end, the church has no power over state. The proof of this proposition is all things merely temporal, which is temporary, things on the earth, compared to immortal, are outside the end of the church. Now it is a general rule that no society has power in those things which are out of its proper end. Hence the civil society or the state, even though every member of it be Catholic, is not subject to the church, but plainly independent in temporal things which regards its temporal end. So this, the civil society, or even the state, even though being a member, every member of it be Catholic, which is universal church, is not subject to the church, but plainly independent in temporal things which regard its temporal end. So if it's temporal only, and it has nothing to do with anybody else, then, they're not going to say anything. Proposition 2, and whatever things, whether essentially or by accident, the spiritual end, that is the end of the church, is necessarily involved in those things that, though they be temporal, the church may by right exert its power, and the civil state ought to yield. This proposition is contained in full explanation of the indirect power of the church over the state. The proposition is proved from reason either the church has an indirect power over the state or the state has an indirect power over the church. Common sense. There is no alternative, for as experience teaches, conflicts may arise between church and state. Yeah, I'd say. Now, in any question as to the competence of the two powers, either they must be some judge to decide what does and does not fall within their respective spheres, or they are delivered over to perpetual doubt and to perpetual conflict. But who can define what is or is not within the jurisdiction of the church in faith and morals except the judge who knows what sphere of faith and morals contains and how far it extends? Well, look, faith can move mountains, and if you look back in history, been a lot of miracles done. A lot of spiritual things have happened. And when you understand that a bishop becomes a bishop because he's been chosen to be an apostle, because all the apostles were the first bishops, and Jesus gave the apostles sacred knowledge, and the apostles have given it to their heirs, being the other bishops, they have a lot of spiritual power. It is clear that civil power cannot define how far the circumstances of faith and morals extends. To do this, it must know the whole deposit of explicit and implicit faith. Therefore, the church alone can fix its limits of its jurisdiction. And if the church can fix the limits of its own jurisdiction, it can fix the limits of all other jurisdictions, at least so as to warrant it off its domain. All right? The church is going to claim theirs. Hence, the church is supreme in matters of religion and conscience. She knows the limits of her jurisdiction, and therefore also the limits of the competence of the civil power. Again, if it be said the state is altogether independent of the church, it would follow that the state would also be independent of the law of God in things temporal. So, right, if they're not answering anybody, then they're independent of God's law while they're here on earth. I don't think so. For the divine law must be proclamated by the church. It is unmeaning to say that princes have no superior but the law of God. For a law is no superior without an authority to judge and apply it. We next prove our thesis from authority. We refer to the famous bull Unum Sanctum issued by Pope Boniface. People got a real problem with this Unum Sanctum. Let's see what it had to say. This bull declares that there is but one true church, and therefore one head of the church, the Roman pontiff, and that there are two swords, two powers, spiritual and temporal, the later be subject to the former. So the temporal is subject to the spiritual. This is God's domain. We're in the kingdom of heaven if we choose to be. The bull finally winds up with this definition. And this we declare, affirm, define, and pronounce that it is necessary for the salvation of every human creature that he should be subject to the Roman pontiff. This is undoubtedly a about-faith definition, i.e., an utterance from the chair. It's not the Pope saying that, it's Jesus saying it, right? He gave the kingdoms of heaven to Paul, or to Peter, and Peter was in Rome. And all the popes from then till now are the embodiment of Peter, sitting there on the throne in place of God. They got the power of Jesus Christ. In fact, the bull, though occasion, by and published during the consent between Boniface and Philip, who held that he was in no sense subject to the Roman pontiff, had for its object, and as is evident from the whole tenor and the wording, this: to define dogmatically the relation of the church to the state. It's time to get it decided and get it done. In general, that is, universally, not merely the relations between church and a particular state or nation, France, so over all states. Now what is the meaning of this about faith definition? There are two interpretations, one given by the enemies of the papacy. Is the Pope in this bull claims not merely an indirect but a direct and absolute power over the state, thus completely subordinated to the church, that is, subjecting it to the church even in purely temporal things. This explanation, given formally by the partisans of Philip, the regalist, the reign of, a whole bunch of people, against the lawful authority of the sovereign pontiffs. The second, or Catholic interpretation, is that the church, and therefore the Pope, has indirect authority over the state, and therefore state is subject to the church in temporal things so far as they relate to eternal salvation or involve sin. So if somebody's bringing a claim against you and they're breaking one of the commandments, it's a sin, and the church has got jurisdiction. It doesn't matter if it's the state doing it, a corporation doing it, or your next door neighbor doing it. It's a sin for the officer holding the office. Thus, the illustrious bishop says that the bull affirms merely that Christian rulers are subject to the Pope as the head of the church, but not in purely temporal things. Christian rulers are subject to the Pope, and the United States of America is a Christian nation. Go ask them. Go look at their churches, their glass palaces on Sunday. Still less, continues, does it, the bull, say that the temporal power must act unconditionally in subordination of the spiritual. That this is correct interpretation appears from the whole tenor of the bull itself, for it expressly declares that the spiritual and temporal powers are distinct from one another, that the former be used by the later for the church. So the spiritual is used by the Pope for the church. He can use his spiritual powers if he wants to. Again, it says, the spiritual powers the church has to instruct and judge the earthly power if it be not good. Somebody's got to judge who's breaking God's law, and the church is going to do it. Thank him for it. Again, before issuing the bull, the Pope already declared in something else that he had never dreamt of usurping the authority of the king, assuming any power over the state is purely temporal matters, but that he had declared in the bull, a different one, the king of France, to be, like any other Christian, subject to him only in regard to sin. It doesn't matter if you're the king or not, man. If you're a Christian, you were baptized, right? And you got to follow the rules. From what has been said here, we infer the authority of the princes and the allegiances of subjects in the civil state of a nature are of divine ordinance, and therefore, so long as the princes and their laws are in conformity with the law of God, the church has no jurisdiction against them nor over them. And if you go read the Michigan compiled laws, it will follow canon law as far as you can see that the common law is in there. But those aren't even though that's what the law says, they're not going by law, they're going by statute. And it's private statutes, and I don't even think they're public record, right? Because there are private statutes, and it's a private corporation. If princes and their laws deviate from the law of God, the church has authority from God to judge that deviation and to oblige to its correction. It may be a corporation, but it's a religious corporation, and guess who has jurisdiction over religious corporations? You got it, the Pope. The authority of the church is not direct, and it's only got indirect power, but it exercises in the world depends on certain moral and material conditions. So even though it has this power, its exercise in the world depends on certain moral and material conditions. You got to write them a petition. And you have to point out the sin. That would be the right moral condition, pointing out the sin. The right material condition would be letting them know. This last conclusion is carefully to be borne in mind. It shows that until a Christian world and Christian rulers existed, there was no subject nor whatever for the exercise of supreme judicial authority of the church in temporal things. So first we had to have a Christian world and Christian rulers. So much for the relation of the church to the infidel state. When the Christian world came into existence, which is just as soon as the first Roman emperor became a Christian and he gave ecclesiastic law public authority, the civil society of man became subject to the spiritual direction of the church. So long, however, as individuals only subjected themselves one by one to its authority, the conditions necessary for the exercise of its offices were not fully present. In the infidel state, we didn't have any. Now they started to turn these kings into Christians, and now it's a Christian state. And when it was in Rome, it became, the Roman Empire law became ecclesiastic law, which basically said you couldn't bring somebody in unless you had evidence. The church guided men one by one. Now they're probably talking about the rulers to their eternal end. But yet the collective society of nations was not subject to its guidance. It is only when the nations and kingdoms become socially subject to the supreme doctrinal and judicial authority of the church that conditions of its exercise are verified. It is only when nations and kingdoms become socially subject to the supreme doctrinal or judicial authority of the church that the conditions of its exercise are verified. So we need to make them subject. Then it can be verified. That would be a witness. So much for relation to the church and the Catholic state. At present, the world has, for the most part, particularly withdrawn itself from the socially as whole and a public life of nations from the unity and jurisdiction of the church. Right, we have separation of church and state now. Now the church, is true, never loses its jurisdiction over the baptized, but unless the moral conditions justify its exercise be present, it never puts it forth in regard to heretics or the heretical state. Right? If you point them out a heretic, they'll take care of it. But if you don't, if the moral conditions don't justify it, and the only way they can is if you bring them forward. See, we need to point their sin out. Forget all that shit they want you to point out. Just point out their sin, give them 15 days to answer, take it to the bishop. So much for the relation of the church and the heretical state, heretical, and this entire question, therefore, the authority of its church must be distinguished from its exercise. The deposing power. The question is at present of little or no practical consequence, for according to all canonists and theologians, popes can depose Catholic princes only, i.e. princes who are Catholics not only as individuals but as rulers. In other words, only those princes who are the head of a Catholic Christian nation, where the Catholic religion, Christian religion, is the only religion recognized by law. Well, don't they say the King James Version of the Bible is where the law comes from? That's a Christian, right? Christian nation. But what right was the deposing power exercised by the sovereign pontiffs? There are two opinions upon the Catholic writers. One holds it was exercised merely as a virtue of public right of the medieval ages. The other, that the deposing power exercised by Pope Gregory and other pontiffs is inherent in the primacy. Primacy being included in the indirect power of the Pope in temporal things. This opinion is thus expressed in our article Gregory published in some quarterly, The Power Itself of Deposing Princes. We hold is inherent in the papacy. The power in actuality or its exercise depends on external circumstances. So the power is inherent in the papacy, and using it depends on the circumstances. The moral conditions which justified the deposition of princes when the world was Catholic have practically ceased to exist now that the world has practically, according to secular social regime, ceased to be Catholic and even Christian. That's what they want you to believe. So what was secular? Well, secularity is a state of being separate from religion or not being exclusively allied to any particular religion. Okay, so the ones who are separated from religion is a secular social regime. While therefore in former times exercise of the deposing power was legitimate, it would not be legitimate at present. Now, one of the papal bulls deposing sovereigns has the faintest trace of being defied by faith definition. They are merely penal sentences. And it's a penal sentence because the head of state has been baptized, therefore he's under the jurisdiction of the pontiff, and the pontiff has penal powers, right? And if you go watch those videos I did before, you'll see I'm pointing them out, all these things that come out of the Code of Canon Law of 1983. Hence, it is as Pope Pius himself in one of his discourses says, that the right of deposing princes has nothing to do with the pontiff's infallibility, neither does it have to do with from the infallibility, but from the authority of the pontiff, because they're baptized, and the church claims jurisdiction over faith and sin and all baptized people, and oaths and vows and promises and anything to do with faith and sin is the exclusive jurisdiction of the church. Of course, a Catholic, a Christian, is bound not only to believe the Pope defines from the chair, but also to accept and obey that he otherwise commands, for said above, that the world, according to the secular social regime, had practically ceased to be Catholic or even Christian. For according to the ecclesiastic social regime, it is still formally Catholic, so it is formally, properly Catholic. And there is nothing to prevent the Pope from blessing as formally, properly, the faithful not merely individually, but the whole world collectively. I'm going to ask him to. Hence, it were scarcely correct to assert absolutely that the world was now ceased to be Catholic or even Christian of the temporal principality of the Roman Pontiffs. The primacy is essentially a spiritual office and has not of divine right any temporal appendage. Yet the Pope is, or rather was, sovereign of a small principality in Italy, designated the patrimony of St. Peter, or the suites of the church. The temporal domain, it is true, was not bestowed by God upon the Pope in the beginning, for even toward the close of the 6th century the pontiffs were not yet independent rulers of temporal domains. But when the Roman Empire was overthrown and divided into several kingdoms, then it was that the sovereign pontiffs attained their temporal principality. This civil domain of the Pope, whether acquired by munificence of princes or voluntary submission of peoples, though not essential to the primacy, is nevertheless very useful, nay, in the present state of things, in the measure necessary to the free exercise of the prerogatives of the Pope as head of the Church. Princes, in fact, would scarcely be willing to obey the pontiff placed under the civil power of another ruler. Napoleon I said, "We respect the spiritual authority of the pontiff precisely because he resides neither in Madrid nor Vienna, nor in any other state but in Rome." He had his own state. Pius himself points out how fitting it is in every respect that no occasion should exist for suspecting that the Pope, in the administration of the Church, may sometimes act under the influence of a civil power or the political parties. Who kisses whose ring? The frickin' President of the United States kisses the Pope's ring. It's been on TV. Now such suspicions would be unavoidable should the pontiff be subject to some civil ruler. The temporal principality of the popes has existed already 11 centuries. The temporal principality of the pope has already existed 11 centuries, and thus precedes by long lapse of time every existing sovereignty. First in line, first in time. There is, it is true, no divine guarantee that the power shall continue. It has been treacherously wrestled from the present pontiff by the Italian government. That, however, it will revert to the pope, we have no doubt. Napoleon I, too, took possession of the age's pious. Yet Napoleon's empire has since vanished like a dream, while the patrimony of St. Peter's passed again into the hands of the pontiffs. So you got these modes of petitioning, right? These things come off of, this stuff here is going to come off of newadvent.com. If you were to put in petition as a search and go to the Catholic Encyclopedia, this stuff comes out. So there's ways that you do it. Any private person may personally approach and petition the Holy See. Excellent. It's frequently advisable to make use of an agent in Rome who can attend to the matter personally. For this purpose, any trustworthy man may be chosen, provided he be acceptable by the sacred congregation in which he has to treat. So you got to go to the sacred congregation, get a list of names. Okay. Form and contents of the petition. The petition should be written on double sheet of white paper, of foolscape or large quarto size, and the text should pass, if its length renders it this is necessary, from the first to the second page and so on, as a printed book, no intermediate page being left blank. It sounds to me like you want it written on front and back. And it should be addressed to the Pope himself, who should therefore begin with the words, Most Holy Father. Okay, and then here's some canon laws real quick. The canon law, the church has its own. Why we may want to petition the Pope. The church has its own and exclusive right to judge cases which refer to matters which are spiritual or linked to the spiritual, a violation of ecclesiastic laws, and whatever contains an element of sin, right? Me, you, the mayor, your senator, whoever. If they've sinned, church got jurisdiction to determine guilt and impose ecclesiastic penalties. All tribunals of the church are governed by the canons which follow, without prejudice to the norms of the tribunals of the Apostolic See. Cases for canonization of the servants of God are governed by special pontifical laws. We want to be canonized. The provisions of the code are also applied to these cases where special laws permit an issue to the universal law, and whenever norms are involved, which are their very nature, apply also to these cases. So what is canonization? It's the act of the Catholic or Orthodox Church declares a deceased person to be a saint. We all got a deceased person, right? We're all considered decedents. That's what the civil society did to us. What the church is going to do, well, fine. We'll sanctify it. We'll consecrate it. We'll make it a saint. Now it's a holy relic. And it's sacrilege to violate a holy relic. But in the meantime, the competent form. Canon 1404, the first see is judged by no one. Right? Somebody has to be on the top. It's the first see. In the case mentioned in 1401, the Roman Pontiff alone has the right to judge heads of state. Excellent. And what did it say he could judge heads of state for? Matters which are spiritual or linked to the spiritual, and violations of ecclesiastic laws, and whatever contains an element of sin. He can judge a head of state on sin. He broke a commandment. Shoplifting. Doesn't matter. Genocide. But we need to take it to them. And they have a certain way they want to do it. This is off the ecclesiastic addresses. Oh, the Pope, the sovereign pontiff, is addressed at the commencement of the letter, Most Holy Father. In the body of the letter, His Holiness. It's customary to speak of him always in the third person, and letters within, prostrate at the feet of your holiness, yada, yada, yada. Instead of a letter, a petition is sent to the sovereign pontiff. So we're not sending him a letter, we're going to send him a petition to be examined by him. And So then you would start at Most Holy Father, prostrate your feet in your holy holiness. The undersigned end of the diocesan has the honor to set forth as follows, and the statement of the request ends with the words, and may God enrich your holiness with his gifts. After filling the petition lengthwise to the paper, the petitioner should write at the top to His Holiness Pope, somebody in the middle, for the petitioner, and at the bottom, to the right, the name of the agent or the person charged with the transaction. Okay, so they even want you to fold the dang thing right. So I'm working on one for, this is mine to go to the Holy Father. Most Holy Father, prostrate at your feet of your holiness, the undersigned Robert Allen, Son of God. Even though it does say in the Gospel of Thomas, I must point out, it does say in the Gospel of Thomas where Jesus says, right, basically the first man to walk in the door, not born of a woman, you should prostrate yourself in front of. Well, the Pope was born of a woman, so, but okay, let's go with it. Has the honor set forth as follows. I have found the nesting place of the owl where his followers gather to pray at his feet. They meet yearly or more often in a California forest in a place known as Bohemian Grove. These great men and women claim to be the rulers of the Christian nations, yet they do not fear God, pray to a false idol, religiously transgressing all of God's laws. If the public record is to be believed, their membership include the power elite of the godless, the unconscious, those with poisoned, brainwashed minds. This Son of God would be most pleased if you were to inquire of their members if they wish to confess their heresies and beg the forgiveness of our most heavenly Father, or continue to take his name in vain and suffer eternal damnation. Save those you can, but if you must banish a few to the domicile of their chosen Lord for the salvation of the rest, I pray you will tell the Heavenly Father it was done in the way of his Son. May God enrich your holiness with his gifts. That's what I'm going to send him. Something like that. It isn't done yet. And then here's just some more ways that other people are. Right? This is the way you're supposed to do a bishop. Got different ways to do it. They got one in here for, well, really that's enough. So anywho, that's why I'm doing all this stuff, right? We need to send the letter first. Got to get the clock running. It doesn't really matter what else you're doing. Write the letter, send it to them. Cost you 44 cents. Get the clock running, and here over the next couple of weeks, get some ideas of what's going to go on the petition if it's necessary. But the thing to do now is see how they react to this. They haven't seen this before, but I know this: they're scared as shit of God. Right? If you listen to any of the stuff I've said or done, or the calls we've had and stuff, they're afraid of God. So let's bring God into the courtroom. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Y'all have a great day. Talk again soon. Bye.